Hey everyone, you're here sewing with Cody, and in today's video we are working on the new Bernina 770 Quilters Edition Plus. So this is the new 770 Plus. The biggest signifier or distinguishing factor between the 770 Plus and the regular 770 or the old 770 is this big 7-inch touchscreen, which is wonderful. So we're going to dive deeper in this video on just playing, well, we're going to be basically playing with the machine and see how the user interface is and what kind of stuff we can find here in the machine. So before we get started, make sure you like the video or give it a thumbs up if you enjoy the video. Subscribe to the channel to see more content. Share these videos with your friends. And of course, check the link below to the merchant shop and see all the different products we have to offer on there. And the proceeds from those sales go to help promote this channel and these videos. So let's get started. So here we're looking at the Bernina 770 Plus. As I mentioned before, the biggest difference between the 770 Plus and the regular 770 or even the upgraded 770s is this 7-inch touchscreen, just like our 790. So I think with this video, we're going to go and walk through a lot of the different stuff, not in full detail, because we left that to our brochure videos, but we're actually going to play with it more, a little bit more, look at the different stitches and some of the programs and some of the buttons and features in the machine, so you can kind of get an idea of what these machines are capable of. I know these machines are heavily back ordered. They've been back ordered for a very long time. They just slowly trickle in. So many of you may have one on order and you just kind of want to see how it works, how it functions, and what the machine's capable of. Some of you may be interested in one, or you may have one, you have no idea how to use it. So we'll just dive right into the machine. So if you are familiar with any of the if you're familiar with any of the 7 Series Bernina machines, this machine is no different. You've got your multifunctional knobs, you've got your speed control. All of these buttons are the same for most of our machines out there. Some of the things that change with some of the machines are these 2 buttons. There's our button that will raise and lower the foot. And of course, this is our automatic thread cutter button. But if you are familiar at all with the 790, this machine is very similar to that machine. It's almost identical, to be perfectly honest. Has all the same buttons as the 790 Plus does. So as for the machine user interface itself, because this is something that, I'm not going to say it's different, but this is something that's very unique to the 770, because the buttons are all the same for the 790. Even the old 770, you've got 2 new buttons up here, where the other one only had 2 buttons here. But the user interface has a lot more things. And as we go along, we'll kind of compare the differences between in the screen portion of the 770 and the 790. So here we have on the side, we've got our automatic thread tension. So when you do go and change to different stitches, you'll see that thread tension automatically change. This is something we see with all of our Bernina machines that have a touch screen. So whenever we maneuver around a different stitch, even if we take a stitch and we adjust it, we'll see that tension change. And of course, we'll see our stitch change and alter on the screen. Something that's much different with this 770 opposed to previous machines is we can see our foot that we have selected. And that's something that we can adjust and change. So if you do go and say, okay, I'm going to do a buttonhole, which is on the side here, I go and select that buttonhole stitch, it will then come and we can see here that we can change, and it will recommend the 3A. So the most recommended foot is going to be in this top left-hand corner, but we have the 1C foot selected. So if we didn't have the 1C foot selected, it would automatically change to that buttonhole foot. We see the same thing when we're utility stitches and we're at a overlock stitch. It's telling us to use our overlock foot, which is the number 2A. The same thing for a blind hem. It's recommending the 5, and we can see our foot display on the screen. We can see a perfect representation of that foot and how that stitch is going to lay with that foot. This is a feature that we've only seen on the Bernina 880s, 780s, and 790s. but now the 770, because it has this big touchscreen, is we're able to select these stitches, see them like we have been able to see with the touchscreen Bernina, but now because of the bigger screen, we've got more space to work with, and they're able to display the foot on the screen. So a lot of this, I'm going to say a lot, but a number of the stitches, they're very specific about what foot you should be using, like for instance the blind hem stitch foot. So when we select that foot, it will select and show you the foot here. However, if you are using a specific foot, just say if you want to use one of my favorite feet, which is the number 10D for this machine, I can come here, select the foot here, and you can go and you can type up here, so okay, I'm using 10. And it gives you the different feet available, and I'm using the 10D. So we overrode the 5 foot that stitch recommended. And now we've kind of locked in that 10D foot. And we can see that foot displayed here. You can see it with this metal guide and everything. So what's so wonderful about this is if I go and select a different stitch and say you alter it, make it narrow, you move your needle positions, so you do these different functions, and you can make it align with different parts of the feet. And by selecting the foot, you'll be able to see it and what it's capable of doing. The machine still has a lot of ability to determine some of these things for itself. It just may not show you on the screen, but if you select a stitch and you do something with it and you try and sew, if the foot that you have on isn't capable of doing what you manipulated the stitch to look like or to do, it won't let you sew. It'll give you different error messages. So that's one of the really cool features that it makes it very similar to the 790 and 880 is the foot display with restrictions. So on the side, we've seen, just like we've seen on many other machines, we've got pressure foot pressure. So the pressure foot pressure is a wonderful feature. I've talked about it in many different videos before. The pressure foot pressure is basically the amount of pressure your presser foot is applying to your fabric. So for this machine, the default is at 50. Some machines, the default is at 70. They just use a different motor and sensor gauge. But what we're able to do is if we're working with a fabric that stretches, if we're working with a fabric that's thicker, a fabric that's thinner, or we're working on the bias of just say regular cotton fabric, we can adjust this pressure foot pressure. You can either just slide it up and down, or you can use the minus and plus sign here. And it can change the pressure. Higher the number, more pressure is being applied to your fabric. Lower the number, the less amount of pressure is being applied. So if you work with a stretchy fabric or fabric on the bias, one thing you're going to do is you're going to reduce that pressure. We reduce this a lot when we're working with fabric on the bias, for instance. That's what we use a lot of. So we bring that down to the mid-20s or upper 30s. I'm sorry, lower 30s. It depends on the machine and it depends on your fabric. And one thing that you can take note of, which we've seen with all of our Bernina machines, is wherever you adjust anything, it's going to either turn yellow or have a yellow marking around it and highlight in yellow. So we know that we've changed it from the default. You can either click this to clear it out, or you can hit the clear button. Only problem with the clear button is the clear button will change everything. So if we adjusted our stitch width and stitch length, as you can see here, the clear button erased all of that. But we can go back and we can see if you adjust width and length, you'll see your stitch length, which is here, will turn yellow. Your stitch width is up here, which will also turn yellow. And in the event, because we've seen all this stuff happen before, in the event your stitch width or your stitch length knob gets broken, we see this a lot when people come to classes. They're taking the machine in and out of a suitcase. They knock these knobs and they basically break them. So they're still intact, but they're wobbly. And so you turn them, nothing happens. So in the event this happens, yes, they can be replaced. But if you don't have the time to wait or you need to use your machine, you can always click these buttons. So say if you need to adjust your stitch width, you click the stitch width button up here, the number, and you can still adjust your stitch width. You just have to click the buttons or slide it on the screen, and you can change it that way. But also, this is a way you can easily clear your stitch width. Click this, and it will clear just the stitch width instead of hitting the clear button, which will clear everything. So another feature that we see on the left-hand side tab is our stitch plate. So the Bernina 770 comes with two different stitch plates, a 9mm and a 0mm stitch plate. The 0mm stitch plate is excellent for embroidery, and it's excellent if you're piecing. This is a Quilters Edition machine, so you're most likely going to be piecing your quilts with it if you bought it for that reason. But even if you work with delicate fabrics and you're using a straight stitch in the center needle position, if you're embroidering, if you're doing free motion quilting, all with a straight stitch in the center needle position, it is recommended that you change to the 0mm stitch plate. So here we can see there are a number of different stitch plates. The ones we use the most really are the 9, the 0, and then sometimes the 5.5mm stitch plate. So if we are using that 0mm stitch plate, what it's going to do is no matter, once we have it selected, we can see it here, and no matter what stitch we select, it will adjust our stitch length, but it will not touch that stitch width. We can even see a little lock up here. So that we cannot change. Even with our knob, we cannot override that. So one thing to remember, which I've had a lot of customers call, is they've turned on their machine and they can't adjust anything. Nothing's working. And what it is they forgot that they've selected that 0mm stitch plate. And so with having that selected, they can't do anything. They can only do a straight stitch, because by having that stitch plate selected, they told the machine that they have it, and in case the customer forgets they have that on there, the machine will always remember until you tell it otherwise that it can only do a straight stitch in the center needle position, which is very important. Our other two icons down here, this one's just telling us that our feed dogs are in the up position. So if we click it, it should give us a little video of showing us how to lower our feed dogs if we need to lower them. But when we switch back and forth to embroidery, this video will pop up and tell us that we need to lower or raise our feed dogs. But this will just give you a notification of where your feed dogs are currently located. And this is just our little bobbin sensor. So when we start to run low on bobbin thread, a little red line will appear here and it'll kind of blink to let you know you're getting low. But if you click on it, it'll give you a video and show you how to place a threaded bobbin in the bobbin case. And of course, when we run out of thread, the machine will stop and tell us that we've run out of bobbin thread. I did skip one up here, I do apologize. The needle and the stitch plate button both bring you to this same screen, and this is what we can see. We have our stitch plate options, but also we have different types of twin, triple, or wing needles to choose from. So we can tell the machine if we're working with a twin needle or a triple needle or a wing needle, and it will put different restrictions in. So if we select a twin needle, and there's different sizes, and the numbers represent the millimeters between each needle, and the pack on your needle will tell you what those what your twin needles are, so you know which one to select. And so when you come here, once you put a twin needle on, it will basically restrict how wide of a stitch the machine can make. And what's really cool is it will show you what your stitch will look like. So currently, I still have my 0mm stitch plate selected. We can go back to the 9. So when we have that twin needle, you can see what those stitches are going to look like when you're working with a twin needle. So remember, this is a 9mm stitch width machine. I have a 9mm stitch width foot on, but if I try to make my stitch 9mm, it won't let me, because that twin needle cannot make a 9mm stitch width stitch, because the needles are placed to the left and to the right of the center shaft, and it would end up hitting the stitch plate, end up hitting the foot. So by telling the machine what twin needle you're working with, it will put in those restrictions. And you can see that here. So the biggest we can make this one is a 7.2mm. So also other things we have on the screen is we have, this is a common one, is our needle up, needle down. So basically our stopping position of our needle. So right now, whenever we stop sewing, the needle's going to stop in the up position. If we want that needle to stop in the down position, we'll just make sure we click it on the screen. So now whenever we stop sewing, the needle will stop down in our fabric. But as soon as we hit our automatic thread cutter, it will cut the thread, and then it will raise the needle and the foot up. A lot of it depends on what we have set in our settings. But once we hit the thread cutter, even if we have this set in the down position, it will cut the thread and then raise everything up for us. The other buttons we see on the screen is this one right here. So what we see here is we see our foot and we see our stitch to scale. But if we want to see, let me select something a little more decorative. So we can see right now, we can see 3 different stitches, and that's the size that they will stitch out. But if you want to get a much closer view of our stitch, we can click this, which is kind of like a full view of one stitch or one pattern. So here we can see where we don't see any foot pedal, we don't see any presser foot. Our stitch is significantly larger than what's actually going to stitch out, but we can see the whole stitch. And if you notice, there's a little white dot. So that little white dot will travel along the stitch as you're sewing. So you won't really be able to see it underneath your foot, especially when you're working with most of the metal feet. But here you'll be able to see exactly where that stitch is in the process of stitching out when we have this view open. The other thing is our combination mode. So the combination mode is really neat. I know I've got videos on this specifically too. But if we want to take a design, typically we see this with alphabets. It's just easier to see. So if we're in combination mode. We know we're in combination mode because there's a little white line around the plus, and this little window is open here. So if I wanted to write out A, B, and see how it combined those decorative stitches. And it will stitch them all in that order. It'll stitch out the A, the B, and then the C, and then it will repeat it, A, B, and C. So if we do open up this window here, we can see a lot more all at once. And so here we can see our uppercase, our lowercase, numbers, and symbols. So we're able to add numbers, we're able to add symbols. And if you want to add a space, so it can stitch out a first name and then a last name, or you can have it just stitch out the first name over and over and over again. But if you don't add a space between the last and the first letter, it's just going to stitch them all together to look like one large word. So the trick with that is to use an underscore in the symbols. So stitch out the A, B, C underscore, and then start over again at A, B, C. That's just a little trick when working with alphabets in the combination mode. So if we want to get out of the combination mode, because this is a very common thing that people do, is they get in here and they can't get out. Or they accidentally click the plus sign and they can't figure out why they keep adding stitches and all they want to do is a straight stitch. So to get in and out of combination mode or combi mode, you can just hit the plus sign and it'll bring you back just your regular stitch. So also on the screen, we'll see all of our decorative stitches depending on what tab we're in. Because on the right side, we have all of our utility stitches. And if you want to see more of those stitches all at once, because as we can see down here, we've got 4 different pages. So I can open this up and I can see a lot more all at once. And it's condensed down to really just one page, but 2 pages. So these are all of our utility stitches. These are all of our decorative stitches, and they're all in separate folders. And each folder is a different category of stitches, from florals to satins to novelties to holiday. They're all here, and that's different. So currently, the 770 Plus has more stitches. The 770 Plus, I think, has around 1,800 stitches, where the 790 only has around 13 and a half. 1,350 stitches or so. And then we have different alphabets. These are sewing alphabets. These are not embroidery. And then we've got our different buttonhole stitches. Here are our quilting stitches. So the 770 does have the most quilting stitches out of any of the 7 Series machines. And they've got some absolutely gorgeous quilting stitches. Some of my favorite stitches, which I think I even have a video on, are 13, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. Those stitch out absolutely gorgeous. Most 7 Series have this 1321 stitch, and it stitches beautiful. It's perfect for stitching in the ditch using this number 10 foot, especially with that 9mm stitch width stitching. Here are our favorite stitches that we have saved. So they will be in this little tab, and this is how we can save them. This is how we can retrieve them, and this trash can will delete the stitches, whichever one you want, one at a time. Delete whatever stitches we wanted to from our saved stitches. One of the new, very new things on the 770, the 790 has, is this our last used stitches. These are like our last 15, last 25 used stitches. And so these are the last stitches that were used on this machine and how they were used. So if we had selected the zigzag, we can see here is, okay, so we used the zigzag, and in order for a stitch to be automatically saved here, you have to actually stitch it out. You can't have just been here and say, okay, I selected this stitch and I altered it. It's not automatically going to save here until you've actually stitched it out. But so for instance, the last time this zigzag was stitched on this machine, this was the stitch width and this was the stitch length. So those kinds of things get saved in here. So with the Bernina, and this is something that Bernina's had for many, many years, is they have what they refer to as temporary altered stitch memory. So what that means is, we can see it here. So whenever you select a stitch and you alter it, so stitch length, stitch width has been changed from the default. We know that because it's yellow. So whenever we alter it and we go to another stitch, it keeps those settings that we set. We didn't have to stitch them out in order for them to save it like it does here. It will just always remember how we left previous stitches until we either hit the clear button and it'll clear out that stitch, but it doesn't affect every single one. It just affects the stitch that we're on when we hit the clear button. But what happens is, whenever we're jumping back and forth between stitches, it will automatically save how we left it, so we don't have to save it manually or write down what we set a particular stitch to. The only thing that's going to clear it is, like I said, the clear button, or when we turn off and turn on the machine, it will clear all of our temporary altered stitch memories. Unless we actually sewed, then it would have put them here, which is a wonderful, wonderful feature. So something else that we have on our screen is this little eye here. This little eye is going to bring us to more information for the particular stitch that we're on. So right now we're at a straight stitch, so we hit the eye. This is where we have more options of things we can do with that straight stitch. So let me actually select a different stitch because you can actually see things better with that. Go to my little handy dandy flower. So when we click the eye screen, it gives us more information. So the first one here is our pattern repeat. So this one's really cool. So you can just click on it and you can tell, okay, I want to stitch out just 2 flowers. Type in 2, you hit the check mark, and then it will stitch out just 2 of those patterns, in this case 2 flowers. And it will actually count down here until we finish those 2, and once those 2 have been stitched, the machine will stop. Some of the other things we have in a little eye screen is mirror image. So we have a vertical mirror image, so it will flip it on the vertical axis. And then a horizontal mirror image, which we really can't see anything change because it's symmetrical horizontally. Some of the other things that you can be working with is this one right here. So this is our pattern elongation. So this one's really neat. So you can actually increase the size of your stitch, and it will increase the density. So it's not just stretching out the pattern, it will actually fill in those stitches. Wonderful, wonderful feature. The other one is our triple stitch, which we can see here. Clear it out. So this will actually take this stitch and make it a triple stitch. So it will actually stitch it out 3 times. Well, it will stitch over it 3 times in a sense. So as it's stitching, it will go back and forth to create a more bold stitch. And we can do this with most stitches, not all. If the machine won't allow you to stitch a triple stitch, this icon won't be there. So let's go see what else we can find. So some of the other things is with our buttonholes, we'll see that our eye screen changes. Oh, let me go back. You have to select the buttonhole first. So once we select the buttonhole, we'll see our eye screen changes quite a bit. And that's because you have more options or different options for different feet. The machine isn't going to give you all the icons for every stitch you select because it doesn't want you to get confused thinking you can do something when you can't. So the icons are only going to be available for when you can use it for the stitches that you can use. So in instance, we have our buttonhole. We can then tell it what size button we're going to sew so it knows what size buttonhole to make. And what we can easily do, we easily take our button, place it on the screen, and then you can come over, you would hold it, and come over to your knobs and make that yellow circle the same size as your button, and the machine will make the buttonhole the correct size according to your button you're going to be sewing. So these are the kind of things you found in your eye screen. Some of the other things are other buttons we have on the side here. These are our hard keys, so these never change. Where some of these, depending on where you're at in the machine, some of these icons can change because they're part of the actual digital screen. These are not. So the home button, this is how we can switch back and forth from sewing to embroidery. The other one is our settings. So when we come to the little cogs, we have sewing settings, embroidery settings. These are just personal settings. So this is something where we can change the color of our background. You can change the texture of your background, all here. Oops. Here we can turn on and off bobbin sensors, bobbin sensors and our upper thread sensor. Different sounds we can adjust, information about our machine, how many stitches and what version we have. We can find all that here. So something I want you to take note is as we dove deeper and deeper into the settings, we have these little tabs or these little breadcrumbs up here. So if we exit out here, it's going to exit all the way back to our home screen of our sewing. So basically it'll show all of our stitches. But if we just want to go back one or two screens, we can actually just hit one of these breadcrumbs up here. So we can hit just a little sewing machine and it'll bring us back to some of these sewing machine information. We can go back one more. We can see sewing settings and embroidery settings. So some of the things we see in our sewing settings is our initial tie off. We can program our foot pedal to do different things. And we'll have other videos go into more detail about that. And just different settings about the buttons we see here: foot up and down, needle down, positioning, reverse, automatic thread cutter. These are different things that we can change what they do when we click them, which is really cool. So the other one is our little book. I refer to this as my on-screen manual. So I can hit the little book, and if you have questions about threading, just say winding the bobbin. There'll be a little video showing you here, and I've got videos on the channel showing you how to wind a bobbin with commentary and things, what and what not to do. We have questions about automatic thread cutter. You can find it all here in your on-screen manual. So all of our Bernina sewing machines come with a printed manual, but you don't always have to pull it out because a lot of times you can find it here. The beauty of finding it in the machine is that there are videos. So the other thing which is really cool is we do have the Creative Consultant. Oops, hit the wrong button. So the Creative Consultant is the little mannequin. So I can hit the mannequin here, and we can select different types of fabric we're working with. And in using the Creative Consultant, the other button is our question button. So this button can be clicked anytime throughout sewing or embroidery side of the machine. If you have any questions about any buttons you ever see on the screen, you can hit the question mark. If you notice the screen, it's hard to see, but the screen highlighted in blue a little bit, but we have a blue question mark that appears in the center of our screen. So this means whatever button we click right after this, it's just one button, it's a one-time use function. So whatever button we click right after this, it's going to tell us about that button. So in this case, we can say, what is this stitch? So, well, basically what fabric? So this fabric is a medium weight knit, and they'll give you some examples of that. So here we are in our Creative Consultant, and these are different fabrics that we may be working with. So say, okay, I am working with a medium weight knit. You would click that here, and then it's asking what type of sewing are you doing, or what type of application are you doing with that medium weight knit. Let's say I'm putting in a zipper. So here it's going to tell you what stitch to use, what needle and needle size, thread, and what foot to use. So if you hit the check mark, let's get out of this. So if you hit the check mark, it's automatically going to change a lot of things for you. It changed our tension, it increased it, changed our foot to our zipper foot, it changed our pressure foot pressure. If you notice, it dropped it dramatically from 50 to 30, and that's because we are working with a stretchy fabric. If you didn't know you needed to change that, it did it for you automatically. It adjusted our stitch length to be quite a bit longer because it doesn't need to be that tight for that weight of fabric and to put in the zipper. And it moved our needle position over 5 spaces to the right. So it did all of this by going through our creative consultant. A lot of times it's going to change things you didn't even know you needed to change. Wonderful, wonderful feature. The only other 2 buttons here, we've already talked about the question mark button and we've talked about the clear button, but the eco button. So this, what it'll do, it'll put your machine in hibernation mode, turns off the stadium lighting, and it powers down the screen to save electricity. And to get out of the eco button mode, you just hit the eco, this machine, you hit the eco button here, and it takes it out of eco mode, and it kept all of your temporary altered stitch memory, unlike turning off the machine would have erased all this back to default. That is pretty much it running through the machine. Some of the other things that I didn't mention that make this machine different from the 790, or what makes the 790 a little bit different from this machine, because like I mentioned, they're very, very similar, and I'm sure you've noticed that by going through the video if you are at all familiar with the 770. So some of the things that are different is, so this machine, when working with the BSR, which is the Bernina Stitch Regulator, this machine does have 3 different BSR modes. So when you are working with the BSR, you have 3 different modes. There's a mode 1, 2, and now you have a mode 3. And the mode 3 on this machine is a basting stitch. And we can go over the BSR working with this machine in a different video. Some of the other things that the 790 still has over the 770 is the 790 still has the 360 directional sewing, so you can sew in different angles in the machine, and the feed dogs will move in different angles instead of just coming forwards and backwards, which is also the sideways motion feed. It also has Stitch Designer, so in the 790 we have an option here which we can design and create and alter our own stitches, which is super, super cool. And so the 790 also comes with the overlock foot, which we saw here when we're working with the overlock stitch, which is foot number 2. But as for accessories, as for features, the 770 and 790 are very, very similar. A lot of the other things are just, the 790 comes with more feet, but they're very similar in what they're capable of. So to keep this video from being too excessively long, this would be the part 1. This would be just kind of like the sewing overview, the sewing side of the machine overview, and we'll do another video that is dealing with the embroidery. And remember, to switch from sewing to embroidery, we just hit the house button, hit the hoop, and then it should prompt you to lower your feed dogs, and now we will be on the embroidery side of the machine. And so this is what we pick up in the next video. So remember, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. You'll get notifications of new videos. And also check the link in the description below to see the merchant shop, see what we've got offered in there. Remember, the proceeds from those items sold through the shop will go to help promote this channel and to create more videos. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for the embroidery side of the Bernina 770 Plus, and happy sewing.